Let me start with something you use every day. Money. The cash in your wallet, the digits in your bank account, the paycheck you get direct deposited every 2 weeks. You trust it, you work for it, you trade your time and energy for it. But have you ever stopped to ask who controls it? Not who prints it. Everyone knows the answer to that. The Federal Reserve. But who controls the Federal Reserve? Who decides how much money exists? Who determines what it's worth? Who has the power to create money or destroy it? Most people assume it's the government. Federal Reserve sounds governmental. It's got federal right in the name. Must be a government agency. Except it's not. The Federal Reserve is a privately owned central banking system. Created by Congress, but controlled by private banks. It has the power to create money, set interest rates, determine the money supply, and control the American economy. And it was created on December 23rd, 1913, the day before Christmas Eve, in a vote where senators rushed to catch trains home for the holidays. Same year the income tax was created. I had to know why. I wasn't researching banking. I was looking into institutional changes during the 1890s through 1920s, the period when birth certificates became mandatory, when marriage licenses spread to all states, when orphan trains removed children, when asylums institutionalized masses of people, when standardized education became required. A specific window when control over individuals shifted from families, churches, and communities to state and federal institutions. But I kept finding references to 1913, the year the Federal Reserve was created, the year income tax became permanent, the year federal recognition of marriage began, all the same year. And I stopped, because for over 100 years, America had functioned without a central bank. Now, from 1836, when President Andrew Jackson killed the Second Bank of the United States, until 1913, America had no central banking system. Banks operated independently. Money was backed by gold and silver. The federal government had limited control over currency. Then, in 1 year, everything changed. What happened in 1913? Before we talk about what was created, we need to understand what existed before. From 1836 to 1913, America operated without a central bank. Individual banks issued their own currency, backed by reserves, regulated by states. The money supply wasn't controlled by a central authority. The system had problems. Bank runs could devastate local economies. Financial panic spread when people lost confidence in banks. Without a central authority to inject capital, panics could spiral into full economic collapse. The Panic of 1907 was the breaking point. Stock market collapsed. Banks failed. Credit evaporated. The entire financial system teetered on the edge of total failure. And the federal government had no mechanism to respond. They had to turn to a private citizen. J.P. Morgan. Morgan personally organized capital from private bankers, coordinated credit lines, stabilized the banking system through his own personal influence and wealth. A private citizen saved the American financial system because the government lacked the tools to do it themselves. Read that again. In 1907, America's financial stability depended on whether J.P. Morgan decided to help. Not the government, not elected officials, not public institutions. One man with massive wealth and banking connections. And after that crisis passed, Congress decided America needed a central bank. But here's where it gets complicated. The idea of a central bank was deeply controversial. The country had killed 2 central banks already, the first bank and the second bank. Many Americans, especially in rural and western states, feared that a central bank would become a tool of Wall Street bankers, giving them control over the nation's money. They called it the money trust, the concentration of financial power in the hands of a few banks in New York City, and they weren't wrong to be concerned. In 1912, the Pujo Committee investigated the money trust and found that a small group of banks and bankers controlled enormous swathes of American industry through interlocking directorates and financial dominance. J.P. Morgan and Company, First National Bank, National City Bank. These weren't just banks, they were the center of American financial power. They controlled railroads, steel companies, utilities, insurance companies. The Pujo investigation documented this concentration of power, made it public. Showed that a handful of men in New York controlled vast portions of the American economy. And then Congress created a central banking system and gave those same banks control over it. The push for a central bank began in 1908 with the Aldrich-Vreeland Act, which created a National Monetary Commission to study banking reform. The commission was chaired by Senator Nelson Aldrich, a Rhode Island Republican. Aldrich proposed a system run by private bankers who would act as federal agents. A central bank controlled by bankers, not the government. Progressives opposed this plan. They called it a surrender to the money trust. William Jennings Bryan and others demanded government control, not private banker control. The fight over the central bank became a major political issue. Democrats in the 1912 election platform opposed the Aldrich Plan, but demanded systematic revision of banking laws to protect the public from domination by what is known as the money trust. Democrats won the 1912 election, presidency, House, Senate, complete control of the federal government, and they created a central bank anyway. The compromise was designed to appear like government control while maintaining private banker influence. Congressman Carter Glass and Senator Robert Owen crafted a plan where private banks would control 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, but a central board filled with presidential appointees would oversee the system. Private control at the regional level, government oversight at the top. A hybrid structure meant to satisfy both sides. 12 regional banks scattered across the country to diminish Wall Street's influence. Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Dallas, Kansas City, Minneapolis, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, San Francisco, St. Louis. Geographic distribution, not concentrated in New York, designed to prevent the money trust from dominating the system. Except the New York Federal Reserve Bank would become by far the most powerful, the most influential, the de facto center of the entire system. Geography didn't matter when economic power concentrated in one place. The structure looked decentralized, but functioned with New York at the center. The bill passed the House in September 1913 with a vote of 298 to 60. But it faced stronger opposition in the Senate. Critics worried about giving too much power to private banks. Others feared too much government control. The debate continued for months. President Wilson personally lobbied senators, convinced enough Democrats to defeat amendments that would have given private banks even more control. Made the bill a party question, binding Democratic senators to vote for it. By December, the Senate was ready to vote. December 22, 1913, the House voted again on the final conference report. 298 to 60 passed. December 23, 1913, the Senate voted. 43 to 25 passed. Every Democrat present voted for it. All but 4 Republicans voted against it. 27 senators were paired, or chose not to vote. Not because they were secretly absent for a Christmas conspiracy, but because they had announced their positions and left early or paired their votes with opposing senators. But here's what matters. The vote happened December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, and as soon as the vote concluded, senators rushed to Union Station to catch trains home for the holidays. The timing wasn't a secret conspiracy, it was documented in contemporary sources. The Nation, a major publication, ran an editorial on January 1st, 1914, noting that the influence of the Christmas spirit helped pass the bill. Congress was as eager as a small boy to get off for the holidays, and the Democratic leadership's resolution not to adjourn until the bill passed undoubtedly had the effect of hastening final action. The editorial joked that Senator La Follette, known for marathon speeches, would usually have spoken for 2 or 3 days, but he let his music die within him. Even he could hardly have faced the universal rage that would have fallen upon him if he had ruined the congressional vacation over the holidays. Read that again. Senators passed the Federal Reserve Act, partly because they wanted to go home for Christmas. The desire to leave for vacation helped overcome opposition to creating a private central banking system. Not a secret plot, just Christmas timing that made senators less willing to fight. President Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act at 6 p.m. on December 23, 1913. He used 4 pens, gave one to each of the leading sponsors. Senator J. Hamilton Lewis of Illinois said, "The bill itself was made in installments, Mr. President." "Yes," Wilson replied, and very slowly. The Oval Office filled with cheers for what would become the most lasting legislative accomplishment of the Wilson administration. And just like that, America had a central bank again. For the first time since 1836, the money supply would be controlled by a central banking system. But this central bank was different from the ones that came before. This one was designed to exist permanently, structured to survive political opposition, built with enough private banker control to ensure Wall Street's support. The Federal Reserve Act created a system where private banks own the regional Federal Reserve banks. Or member banks are required to buy stock in their regional Federal Reserve Bank. That stock pays dividends. The regional Federal Reserve banks are private corporations owned by the member banks. But the Federal Reserve Board, which oversees the system, is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Government oversight of privately owned banks. It's a hybrid structure. neither fully private nor fully governmental. Private ownership with government oversight. Banker control with political accountability. Except the political accountability has limits. Federal Reserve Board members serve 14-year terms. Presidents can appoint members, but they can't remove them. Congress can pass laws affecting the Fed, but the Fed operates independently in setting monetary policy. The Federal Reserve can create money, set interest rates, determine reserve requirements, all without needing congressional approval for specific decisions. Independence was built into the system. And here's what bothers me about the timing. 1913 didn't just give us the Federal Reserve. The 16th Amendment was ratified February 3rd, 1913. The amendment that allowed federal income tax, proposed by Congress in 1909, ratified by the required number of states in 1913, officially certified February 25th, 1913. The Revenue Act of 1913 implemented the income tax shortly after. A graduated income tax on individual Americans means something that had been ruled unconstitutional before the amendment. So in 1913, America got a central bank and an income tax, both in the same year. Think about that. Before 1913, the federal government's revenue came primarily from tariffs and excise taxes. Taxes on goods, not on individuals. The government didn't need to track individual incomes because it didn't tax them. After 1913, the federal government could tax individual income. But to tax individual income, the government needed to know how much each person earned. Track wages, monitor businesses, require reporting. The income tax created a system where individual earnings became the government's business, not family wealth, not community standing, individual income. And the Federal Reserve gave the government tools to manage the currency used to pay those taxes, control over money creation, interest rates, inflation, both created in the same year. I tried to find documentation explaining why 1913 was the year for both. Why did the income tax and the Federal Reserve happen simultaneously? Was it coordinated? Did they plan it that way? The official histories treat them as separate reforms. The income tax was about making the tax system more progressive, shifting the burden from regressive tariffs to graduated income taxes. The Federal Reserve was about preventing financial panics and stabilizing the banking system. Two unrelated reforms that happened to occur the same year. Except they're not unrelated. A central bank needs a stable source of government revenue to function effectively. Income tax provides that revenue. The government can borrow from the Federal Reserve, but it needs income to service that debt. Income tax ensures the government has revenue regardless of tariff fluctuations or economic conditions. And income tax creates dependency on the central banking system. If the government needs to track individual incomes, it needs a stable currency. If it needs a stable currency, it needs a central bank to manage it. The two systems reinforce each other. Income tax creates need for monetary stability. Central banking provides monetary stability. Both expand federal power over individuals and the economy. Both created the same year. There's something else about 1913 that connects to the larger pattern. 1913 is the same year the federal government formally recognized marriage for the first time. The Revenue Act of 1913, the same law that created income tax, also created the first federal recognition of marriage for tax purposes. Married couples were taxed differently than single individuals. Marriage became relevant to the federal government because it affected revenue. Before 1913, marriage was a state matter, a church matter, a family matter. The federal government had no role. After 1913, marriage affected your federal tax burden. The government needed to know if you were married because it changed how much tax you owed. So 1913 brought income tax, the Federal Reserve, and federal recognition of marriage. Three major expansions of federal power, all the same year. Not coincidence, not unrelated reforms. A systematic transformation of the relationship between individuals and the federal government. The timing of the Federal Reserve vote bothers me for another reason. December 23rd? That's 1913, day before Christmas Eve. But that's not the only major reform that happened around Christmas in this period. Think about it. Major institutional changes, significant transfers of power, reforms that fundamentally altered American life. How many of them happened right before holidays? Right before breaks? Times when people's attention was elsewhere? I couldn't find a pattern of deliberate Christmas timing across all reforms. But I did find that major legislation often passed when lawmakers were eager to adjourn, when the desire to leave overcame the willingness to fight. The Federal Reserve vote happened when senators wanted to go home for Christmas. That's documented. Whether that was strategic planning or convenient timing, the effect was the same. Opposition weakened when vacation approached. Debates shortened, compromises happened, bills passed. And once passed, once signed, once implemented, reversing them became nearly impossible. The Federal Reserve opened for business in November 1914. By then, World War I had started in Europe. The war would require massive government spending, huge loans, currency stability during international crisis. The Federal Reserve's first major test came immediately, and the Federal Reserve succeeded. It helped finance American participation in the war, manage currency stability, prevented the financial panics that might have accompanied mobilization. The system worked. But working doesn't mean it was the only option. Working doesn't mean it was the best option. Working just means it accomplished what it was designed to accomplish. What was it designed to accomplish? Prevent financial panics by centralizing monetary control. Give the government tools to manage the economy. Provide banker influence over currency policy. It did all of that. What it also did was concentrate enormous power in a system controlled partly by private banks and partly by government appointees with 14-year terms that made them largely independent of political pressure. The Federal Reserve can create money, can set interest rates, can determine how much money exists in the economy, can influence inflation, employment, economic growth, all without needing congressional approval for specific decisions. That's extraordinary power. And it was created in a December 23rd vote while senators rushed to catch Christmas trains. Here's what I couldn't find in the archives. I couldn't find documentation of public hearings where citizens testified about wanting a central bank. I couldn't find grassroots movements demanding the Federal Reserve. I couldn't find letters to editors, community meetings, popular uprisings calling for this reform. I found elite advocacy. Banking interests wanted it. Some progressives wanted it with government control. Economists and financial experts debated different structures. But regular people, farmers, workers, small business owners, I found opposition from those groups. Suspicion of centralized banking, fear of the money trust, resistance to Wall Street control. The Federal Reserve wasn't a popular demand answered by Congress. It was an elite solution to a real problem, the problem of financial instability and bank panics. But the solution concentrated power in ways that benefited the banks who had caused many of those panics in the first place. J.P. Morgan bailed out the economy in 1907. 7 years later, Congress created a system where Morgan's bank would have influence over monetary policy through the New York Federal Reserve Bank. The people who created the problem helped design the solution. The Federal Reserve has existed for over 110 years now. It survived the Great Depression, survived World War II, survived countless economic crises, recessions, policy changes, political shifts. The structure created in 1913 remains largely intact. 12 regional banks, a board of governors, private ownership with government oversight, independence from direct political control. Some things changed. The gold standard ended. The Fed's mandate expanded. New tools were added. But the basic structure, the fundamental design, that's still the 1913 version. It proved remarkably durable, exactly as it was designed to be. But durable doesn't mean unchangeable, doesn't mean permanent, doesn't mean beyond question. Every institution created by humans can be modified by humans. The Federal Reserve exists because Congress created it in 1913. Congress could modify it, restructure it, even eliminate it. They don't. The Federal Reserve's independence is considered essential to its function. Monetary policy should be insulated from short-term political pressure, the theory goes. Elected officials might be tempted to inflate the currency before elections, manipulate interest rates for political gain, prioritize short-term benefits over long-term stability. An independent central bank, run by experts with long terms, makes decisions based on economic conditions rather than political calculations. That's the theory. In practice, the Federal Reserve's independence means elected officials can't easily change monetary policy even when they disagree with it. The Fed can pursue policies that hurt workers, that increase unemployment, that benefit banks over people. And voters can't directly hold the Fed accountable because voters don't elect Fed officials. The president appoints them, yes, but once appointed, they serve 14-year terms and can't be removed for policy disagreements. Independence from politics also means independence from democratic accountability. That's a feature, not a bug. It was designed that way in 1913. Today, the Federal Reserve is the most powerful financial institution in America. It controls the money supply, sets interest rates, regulates banks, manages economic crises, makes decisions that affect every American's financial life, and it operates through a structure created on December the 23rd, 1913, when senators rushed to catch Christmas trains. The same year, income tax was created. The same year, the federal government recognized marriage. The same period when birth certificates became mandatory. When marriage licenses spread to all states. When orphan trains removed children. When asylums institutionalized people. When standardized education became required. All part of a larger transformation, moving control from families, churches, communities, to state and federal institutions. Centralizing power, creating systems that track individuals rather than families, expanding government reach into private life. The Federal Reserve was one piece of that transformation. You use Federal Reserve notes every day. The cash in your wallet says Federal Reserve note at the top, not United States dollar, not American currency, Federal Reserve note. Because the currency you use isn't issued by the government, it's issued by the Federal Reserve, a privately owned central banking system created by Congress, but controlled through a hybrid structure of private and public authority. The government prints the physical notes, yes, but the Federal Reserve determines how many exist, controls their value, manages their creation and destruction. Every dollar you earn in Federal Reserve notes. Every dollar you spend Federal Reserve notes. Every dollar you save in Federal Reserve notes. The Federal Reserve controls the value of your labor, your savings, your future economic security, not through direct force, but through monetary policy that affects inflation, interest rates, employment. And that system was created December 23rd, 1913, the day before Christmas Eve, when senators wanted to go home. Same year as income tax. Same year as federal marriage recognition. Same period as institutional consolidation across multiple systems. What changed in 1913? Why did that year bring income tax, the Federal Reserve, federal marriage recognition? Why did the federal government suddenly need control over money creation, individual income, marital status? Why create systems that track individuals rather than families? That centralize power in federal institutions rather than state, local, community institutions? Why structure the Federal Reserve with enough private control to ensure banker support, but enough government oversight to make it appear democratic? Why give it independence that insulates it from democratic accountability? Why do all of this in the same year? The Federal Reserve still exists, still controls the money supply, still sets interest rates, still manages the currency you use every day, still operates through the structure created in 1913, largely unchanged despite 110 years of economic transformation. Still privately owned at the regional level, still government overseen at the top, still independent of direct political control, still making decisions that affect every American's economic life without needing congressional approval for specific policies. The system works, in the sense that it does what it was designed to do. Prevents bank panics through central coordination, manages monetary policy, provides stability. But stability for whom? The 2008 financial crisis showed the Federal Reserve prioritizing bank survival over homeowner relief, showed central banking working to save institutions while people lost homes. The system works for the institutions it was designed to protect: banks, financial markets, the structure of the economy. Whether it works for regular people depends on whether your interests align with institutional stability. December 23rd, 1913. Senators rushed to Union Station to catch Christmas trains. President Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act at 6 p.m. The most powerful financial institution in America was created. Same year as income tax. Same year as federal marriage recognition. Same period when control shifted from families and communities to federal institutions. All documented, all verifiable, all still affecting your life today. The Federal Reserve notes in your wallet, the income taxes deducted from your paycheck, the federal recognition of your marriage that affects your tax status, all created in the same narrow window, all part of the same transformation. Still there, still controlling money, still operating independently since December 23rd, 1913, when senators wanted to go home for Christmas. And nobody asked you if that's what you wanted.